Okay, I'm Jacqueline Kiernan McKay. I'm director of the Province College Parent Program and a member of the graduate school faculty. And with me is Dr. Wanda Ingram, Senior Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies, also a member of our grad school faculty, and the Freshman Dean. Okay, so I want to welcome you to our session, Mid-Semester and Beyond, Strategies for Parents and Students. And I want to welcome you to Providence College as well. I know we had a wonderful session this morning, and I know you'll find the next day and a half to be just as passionate, and there's so much energy on this campus right now. It's a fun place to be at. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with students at this point, mid-semester mark, and some strategies for parents, particularly, in helping your students to move forward as we get to the home stretch. I feel like I know so many of you from your emails and phone calls to the parent program, and I know I met a number of you also this summer at orientation during our Parents as Partners program. You know, this is as Father Shanley said, this is our centennial year, and we've begun our year with lots of celebrations, wonderful celebrations. And last week we had Doris Kearns Goodwin, a wonderful historian on campus, and gave a wonderful talk, and we had a room full of faculty and students and people from the community. And in thinking what she had to say, and then in reflecting on this weekend, a quote from Abraham Lincoln came to mind. Abraham Lincoln, okay? And basically he said, at one point, I don't know when, two things can change our lives. Two things can change our lives. The books we read and the people we meet. The books we read and the people we meet. That's college, isn't it? Certainly the academic rigors of college as we help students intellects, and certainly the many folks that come in and out of their lives, whether it's professors, whether it's deans, whether it's fellow students, embracing differences, working together. Again, what college is all about, certainly. The timing for this weekend couldn't be better. We're about 8 weeks into the semester, and it gives time for students to put their roots down. Imagine, we're already at mid-semester. I don't believe it. It seems like we're talking at summer orientation. Students have become accustomed to the academic rigors of college life, and also for many students, new friendships have begun to take hold. And I know we have a lot of parents, but I do want to welcome the students who got up this morning to come to the session also. And I'm sure parents, you've observed a change in your students. The anxiety, think back to that move-in day, the anxiety of moving in, not quite knowing what to expect, that awkwardness. And now what? Your students are playing host as they welcome you to their new homes. So I always think that this is one of my favorite times of the year. The timing this weekend is also significant because students right now are faced with a lot of stress and anxiety. They've just finished their first set of mid-semester exams, and they just received their mid-semester grades. And Dean Ingram here is going to help us put that in perspective in a little bit. But for some, there's a sense of pride. For others, some anxiety, which is okay. It's mid-semester. It's your first set of college exams. You know, there's seats up here, folks. If you want to join us, please. Come on down. Sounds like, come on down. Sounds like the price is right? Come on down. Okay. Yeah, there's plenty of seats right here. Okay, no. Come on. We're all family, right? Okay. So what's going on with students right now? And some of the students in the audience here, I'm sure, can shake their heads in affirmation. Well, some may feel a real sense of belonging to their new institution, while others are still trying to find that connection, find that niche. And we said during orientation this summer, adjustment is an ongoing process, and that those first 6 to 8 weeks are really critical where students begin to feel that sense of belonging. Some have not seen their friends from high school since September and really miss them. As one student said, it's not so much homesickness, it's friend sickness they're dealing with, right? Friend sickness. Remember, too, homesickness can sometimes be on time delay. Oftentimes, feelings of loneliness and longing for the familiar can get worse when the excitement of the new series a semester fades away. So, the reality of being here and dealing with the day-to-day issues of being in college, and also at the time, mid-semester, students' defenses are down, they've been studying, they're tired, and they tend to think of what's familiar to them and long for that sense of home. Relationships, particularly with roommates. For some, with relationships with roommates may be flourishing. For others, maybe not have met their expectations. In any case, students I know have probably invested a lot of time and energy learning to live in a new environment with others. And maybe some need to adjust their expectations as well. Their increased personal freedom may feel wonderful, right? But feel a little frightening at times. They may find right now at mid-semester that habits and routines are beginning to set in. And these habits and routines can work for them or against them, okay? Time management issues, we know again and again, number one issue for first-year students. Many students find that learning how to manage time effectively is one of their biggest challenges, and they're still struggling to find that balance. As one student said to me recently, in the beginning, my roommate and I would take a nap during our free time between classes. Now we know better. We can't waste that time. We need to learn how to pace ourselves, okay? So some of the non-academic issues, and we'll be talking about some strategies later on, but right now I want to turn this over to my partner in crime, Wanda Ingram, who is going to be talking about academic issues, and particularly, again, those mid-semester grades and some of those anxieties around that. And again, folks, we have some seats sprinkled through, so please feel free to come up.
Thank you. I'm going to have to put this on here because I know how I am. I talk with my hands a lot. This won't last. Microphone's going to be all over the place. Okay, all right, so let's get started here. Okay, so some of you I have had a chance to meet or talk with, et cetera, especially some of the students. Jackie introduced me as being the freshman class dean, and I'm also the interim director for academic advising. That won't last much longer, which is a good thing. It's been 4 years, so it needs to kind of come to, yeah, it's a long interim, yeah, because I said 1 year, and it's been 4 years now, so obviously that one is not going as well as it should, but we're getting there. And most importantly, and this is one thing I always want to make sure that a lot of folks know about, I'm also a member of the class of 1975. I was in the first women's class here. So there were, maybe 270 of us, so just a small little group, and they said it wouldn't last. So obviously, things have changed a great deal in reference to PC being co-ed, and that's going to remain. But it's fun to come back and to work with some of the folks who actually were here and made those kinds of statements. So I've been having a good time with that one, too. Haven't behaved at all, but this is, if you get to know me, you'll know I don't behave anyway. So I try to enjoy myself with my work. And right now, it is a time of stress for some students, and for some students, they're doing extremely well. Either way, I ask students, do you know why things are happening to you the way they are? If you are doing well, do you know why? Because that's just as important a question. Or if you're not doing well, do you know why? Because you need to understand what it is that you're doing right and what it is that you're doing wrong. And not necessarily wrong in a bad way, it's just you have used, and a lot of times, the strategies from high school, and they've worked well for our students. That's what got them here. They've all been accepted because they've done so extremely well in high school. But what the realization is now for a lot of our students is that it's not necessarily going to work as well for them now that they're here as first-year students. So for some students, it's time for a plan B, Plan C, Plan D, a lot of letters in the alphabet, and this is what I've been telling them because I'm meeting with quite a few of them. They're no longer wake-up calls, because I'm not calling them to get up to go to class, and I'm hoping that you're not, parents, okay, and families. There are reminders that a lot of times they depended on all of you to do for them as family, and now it's up to them to remind themselves and come up with new ways and habits to do that. Picking up materials for projects. I can remember with my own child doing a lot of those things so that it's all right there for her to work with on the dining room table. and now suddenly they have to do these things themselves. And I'm not going to talk about laundry because that's another whole story we'll talk about a little bit later. All right. But there are important bullets, and we're talking timelines that are going on at this point. So mid-semester came and went. That was October 19th. Benchmarks. Students have gone through quite a few midterm exams, and in some cases maybe they haven't, but still some grades have been submitted with regards to that. Now I think the realization is hit as some students are looking at their syllabus for each one of the classes that there are other deadlines that are forthcoming very rapidly because November is literally right around the corner. So Halloween is about to bring that upon them. So there are quizzes and exams and papers, and heaven forbid that 2 or 3 faculty have all decided to have their quizzes and exams and whatever on the same day. Imagine that. Imagine. And I have some that will come in and they're just outraged that, well, I don't understand why. I'm thinking they have their own classes that they're teaching. This means you need to look at these deadlines early and plan and be prepared, because going in with that kind of an attitude with that professor is not going to go over too well. So we need to get that worked on. So I find I do a lot of interesting things in my office when I have my meetings with students, and working on that is one of them. So students are also realizing that registration is right around the corner, and that's November 18th and 19th. And then we have other populations that might be registering a little bit earlier, but bottom line is that registration's right around the corner. Now with that comes realizations from orientation. A lot of students, when they arrived, they were magically in classes, so they don't necessarily know how they ended up in those courses. And now it's a case where they have to figure out how to get themselves into these classes. And that's a process, and it's a new process for a lot of them. So it's a case of working with them, and they're hearing right now from their academic advisors, and they are not guidance counselors, so the expectation of that different role for the person that they're working with is going to be very important. So on top of the timelines that we're talking about, classes end December 9th, final exams December 12th, with the Western Civ course as the first one that they have, and finals end around December 17th. So big difference between high school and college. Students are realizing now that their classes are quite different. You have a lot of information that's covered in a very short time. Star Wars and Star Trek have nothing on this because you talk about light speed for some things. And a lot of students have not realized just how much information is covered in that very short time. Courses go into more depth and breadth of information, even though we are moving at a fast rate. The courses are structured differently and as to how they're presented. And the amount of time that exams are given to students can be a problem for some. We have essay exams, multiple choice, we have true and false, fill-ins, all the above, none of the above. Multiple choice in my day was either it was A, or it was B, or it was C, or E. Now it's A, B, B, C, all the above, none of the above. Those are multiple choice tests, and a lot of times if you don't know the information precisely, it's going to be a problem for you if you haven't studied properly. And that thing called extra time to take an exam, unless you have accommodations or you have a learning disability, et cetera, normally doesn't exist in a lot of classes, but students have been accustomed to that from the high school process. So, and also expecting that the professor is going to give a lot of hints as to what's going to be on the exam. And I warn students, if the professor asks, what do you have for questions with regards to the upcoming exam? Don't raise your hand and say what's going to be on the test. Because the professor in a lot of cases might just say to you, everything, and then what are you going to do? So they have to learn now how to study appropriately and to glean information from their lectures and their textbooks, and that takes time. And when we start talking about note-taking and reading comprehension, even more time, and sometimes it's a little bit more stressful. So in some cases, I hear students talk about test anxiety, because as a result of taking this exam and studying or whatever, sometimes they may get tripped up a little bit in one exam, and then suddenly the anxiety starts to build. And they know the information, but they're not able to show it. And in some cases, when they come in to talk with me, and I'll ask, well, did you have any problems with this in the past? In many cases, they have experienced this from high school, but thought maybe it was going to go away, or they would work it through, or because I'm in college, it would be fine. Not necessarily. So there are things that they have to do to work on this. What I'm getting at is that we all have strengths and weaknesses when it comes to test taking, and students don't realize it. As you can tell, I like to talk. I do great on essay exams, all right? I do. do great on them. I just have to watch my time in reference to that one. I don't do well on the multiple choice exams.
Time management issues, yes.
Yes, yes, exactly. So students have trouble sometimes integrating all the material that they're learning. And sometimes all they want to do in some cases is to memorize. And you can't do that. Western Civ, which we're in one of the Western Civ rooms right now, you can't just memorize all the facts and figures, etc. We're talking history, theology, literature, philosophy. It's an interdisciplinary course. You have to understand how one subject interacts with another. That's not memorizing. We could have a line of parrots up here in front of the room to squawk back exactly what's being said verbatim. You have to understand why it's of importance, etc. So that's getting me to what's going on with regards to the classroom and professors. Every single professor has his or her own teaching style. And a lot of times students don't realize how different it is from high school. And the professors assume that the students are going to know all the material unless they ask some kind of a specific question. And that's an important one. And just because a professor teaches a certain way may not necessarily gel with how a student learns. I learn best by example. If you show me how to do something, it's much easier for me to understand it. But you'll have professors that may not necessarily do that. The exam might be based strictly on what's going on with what was read instead. So this is one of the reasons why we have tutorials available. And it's so funny to me when I'm talking with students now, inviting them to come in to meet with me. I use the word invite. And they'll talk with me about, well, this business of tutoring, I was a tutor. I was a valedictorian. And I hear all of it with the hand on the chest, among other things. And I'll say, okay, and I let them go ahead and say what they need to say, because, I mean, that's important stuff. That's how they got here, yes. But bottom line is, you need to do things differently now that you're here. So maybe you were the tutor at that time. Now you need to be the tutee, and there's nothing wrong with that word either. So it's a case of learning that your role might change, and eventually you probably will be a tutor and working with students once you get a little bit older and get to know the ropes a little bit better. I think that's the bottom line here. But the reason for mid-semester grades is for this very reason of understanding where do I stand with regards to my classes right now. Because a lot of students will think that they're doing stupendously well, and then they'll get the mid-semester grades and realize, okay, I'm not quite sure where that grade came from. And in some cases, like the sciences, the lab grades are not included with the grade that the student has received. So it might just be based on one test only, which maybe a student didn't do so well on, but their lab grades are fantastic. So it's understanding exactly what this whole process is all about. The bottom line here is that when we're talking about course preparation and how much time is spent, it's important for the students to realize it's not as much about the time they've spent preparing for classes, it's the quality of the time that they're spending in preparing for their classes and learning how to develop new strategies. And that's a tough one for a lot of students. And they have to implement it in less time because in some cases they may only have a mid-semester and a final and maybe a paper. So if something goes wrong with the mid-semester, now what? You have just the final and maybe one paper or maybe just one quiz. So you don't have a lot of opportunities like you did in high school to be able to get those grades up. And extra credit does not necessarily exist anymore at the college level. And some students will go in and ask, can I get extra credit on a project? And professors are going to sometimes shake their heads and say, no, we don't do extra credit. This is college. So there's some of your differences right there. Now, there are three different types of courses that students need to be aware of. There are constant discipline classes, delayed action, and self-involving. You don't need to know what the actual titles are. This is some of Elwood Chapman's work that I use all the time, as she knows. But bottom line is to understand that there are processes and there are strategies that one needs to use with regards to them. The constant discipline types of courses are math, accountancy, economics, chemistry. They're building block courses. So if you don't understand last week, then this week, the next set of information is built on that, next set of information is built on that, and so on. You get it? So we're talking about building a house. And I don't even know anything about bricks and mortar, but I know you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And you have to have some mortar in the middle, and you have to move things over a little bit so you don't have the lines all the same, okay? Otherwise, houses slide off into the driveway. It's just that simple, and that's how I explain it to a student. So you have to have a good foundation there. In many cases, the professors already kind of anticipate you're new at this as a freshman, so they will say, all right, there's going to be a quiz every week to force the issue that you're going to stay on top of the readings, etc. Because you can't afford to fall behind in those classes, because then you don't know what's going on the next week or the week after that. So believe it or not, I'm less worried about these particular kinds of classes that students have, because they know early on, okay, I don't know what's going on in class because maybe I haven't been going to class for the last 3 weeks and I don't know what they're talking about. Usually the professor will say, come see me, we need to have a conversation. It's the delayed action classes, which are like psych and social and history, where you're doing quite a bit of reading. Maybe there's a midterm, maybe there's a paper. Those are the classes that scare me the most, because students will come in and have the nerve to say to me in my office, I don't have any work to do and I've got plenty of time, and the professor hasn't assigned us anything. And I tell them, let me see your syllabus. You're supposed to be reading chapters 1 through whatever for this week, 2 through whatever for that week, etc. You need to stay on top of all that information so you are prepared and it makes sense when you're in there in the lecture. Otherwise, it's not going to make a lot of sense to you, and you're not going to be able to retain things. So the delayed action courses are the ones where if you want to start asking your sons and daughters and your grandchildren questions about, are you staying on top of the work, those are the kinds of questions you need to be asking, obviously, because time management, as she talked about, those are the big issues where they've put things off. And now suddenly, and I'm old enough to remember the Evelyn Wood reading classes where it's the speed reading, that suddenly they're doing 6 chapters the night before the exam and can't understand why they didn't do well on the test. How can you retain that kind of information? And then if it's going to be a final at the end and you're supposed to retain that, it's not going to stick. It's not going to stick. Self-involving courses, how many people in here are procrastinators? I'm one. Okay, raise your hand, be proud. All right. A lot of us are procrastinators. We tend to put things off that we're not comfortable with or we're not familiar with, etc. And that's okay, as long as you know and recognize that that might be one of your weaknesses at times or another. But if you are a procrastinator, self-involving courses are the kinds that I tell students you need to be careful of, because it's even easier to put those off. Because those are like your art classes where maybe you're working on a project for the most part on your own, and then you'll turn in certain kinds of projects at the end. Art, music, things of that nature. You hold off on those kinds of classes until you really have your act together and not put things off, because that could be a very dangerous one. All right, so enough of the learning stuff on that particular types of courses. Very quickly, students have been sent for, I don't have that many, so that's the good news part of it. But any student who's in the freshman class who has a grade below a C will hear from me by the end of this upcoming week. And it's mid-semester grades, we realize that, and in some cases they don't necessarily have all their grades, but they're going to hear from us with regards to an email. In some cases it's just saying, hi, saw your grades, you have maybe one low grade or whatever for the most part. Just want to remind you, these are all the resources, take advantage of them, etc. If you need to make an appointment with me, fine. And that's just, it's an advisory check, that's all that is. And the majority of the freshman class, that's all we're sending out are advisory emails to them. Now there are a few where I'm wondering if there was a contest for who could, I will say, can get the most Fs. There's about 2 or 3 students only, so not many, only 2 or 3. But I mean, one F after another, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, were they here? Did they go to class? So those students know who they are, and I know they're not in this room because I already know who they are, okay? Because I found them the next day when the grades came out and got on the phone and called them and said, I need you in here like yesterday. So we know who they are already. So they're all taken care of, okay? So we know where they stand. And in some cases, believe it or not, it was the first test or first quiz, and the grades have actually gone up. So parents sometimes are ready to panic and show up on my doorstep when I tell them, bring it down a notch, it's gonna be okay, because in some cases the student is doing okay. Just sometimes that first test or that first quiz, you don't know how to prepare for it, so that's something catastrophic that ended up happening. So we move on from there. But the OAS website, and we did have it up on the screen, but I'm not gonna, I'll bring it back up afterwards if you need to see it, but because I know for time we wanna get you to your next session too. Office of Academic Services is the place that I refer a lot of students to. Their website is phenomenal. Students who are overwhelmed by the reading and other kinds of activities, or expecting to get an A on a particular paper, or not sure about note-taking when it comes to Civ, etc., that's the website that they want to go to, providence.edu, and it's /academic-services. And they send out a lot of information for students to take advantage of that. Students who are not happy about going to tutors, a lot of times I will talk with them about establishing goals. Long term would be what's due for the actual month. Short-term would be what's due for the week, and immediate would be what's due for the particular day. I refer a lot of students to personal counseling because test anxiety is a big issue. Problem solving, decision making, these are all things that are very common for first-year students, and I send them elsewhere to work on those particular things. But it's important for students to develop strategies before the actual finals are about to happen, as well as any kind of final papers. So students need to understand there's a process, and then there's also an issue of subject matter. Sometimes just going to a tutor to talk to them about the subject matter like chemistry or accountancy or math or whatever is not necessarily going to solve the problem. Sometimes it's more an issue of the process. So what I mean is that it's sometimes their learning style versus how the professor is teaching, or how they're taking notes, or how they're studying, the process instead. So they don't necessarily need to go to OAS to talk about getting a tutor in the subject as much as going to OAS to learn about how to do note-taking and study skills, reading comprehension, test taking, etc. And taking advantage of the videos for time management. One last thing I would like to say to you is that we are using email, and I know we have Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all those other things. My granddaughter, who's 7, explains it to me on a regular basis because I'm not good at that stuff, and she says, Mimi, you got to learn. And I go, yeah, hon, I'm working on it. Mimi's working on it, but the issue of emails, that is our main source of communicating with students. And the concern that we have here, and I promised Father Noel I would also mention this as well, is that students, I know you're receiving so many emails that after a while it becomes just one complete, set of noise for you. But you need to check your emails every single day. At the end of the day, sort through, and things that are of importance, fine, and when Father Noel sends you an email, that's important. Okay, subtle hint, that is important. So make sure you open that particular one up. But there are other important announcements and deadlines that are coming up that you need to know about. So please, take the time to look at your emails, because we send out information to you. Enrollment Services send something out on October 14th. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's an important one, because that explains how you get registered for next semester's classes. So on October 14th, please look that email up from Jean Spring registration information, because it has all the links and explains all the information that you need to know with regards to holds, registering, searching for classes, etc., etc. So I can't say that one enough in reference to keeping track of things. Differences between high school and college, obviously. So on that note, I'm going to shut up because I have other things I could talk for a long time, and I'm not going to. Take it away, Jackie.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll tell you a secret. As Wanda said, she was a member of the first women's class. I was one of the first women administrators at the college. I came when I was 12, okay? But Wanda was one of my first students, so everything she knows, she learned from WAC. Okay.
And that's on video. That's good. Okay.
That's right. All right, emails. Come a dirty word lately. I don't want to hear about emails. Okay, but we know they're important. All right, strategies for parents. How can we work together to help students move from here to there and be successful, right? Well, certainly, as Wanda was talking about, resources. You can be a real support to your students by helping them to connect with resources, academic and non-academic resources. 10 years ago, Ken Baines, longtime historian, scholar, academic, wrote a book called What the Best College Teachers Do. And then a few years ago, he followed up that book with What the Best College Students Do, okay? Through interviews and research, he found that the most successful college students who wanted to get the most out of their college experience realized that the sooner that they asked for help, the better off they would be, okay? They didn't wait for a crisis, but they made those early connections. So in other words, they weren't afraid to ask for help, and in fact, they reported that as a result, they felt more comfortable taking risks because they felt like that they had that extra layer of support. So, important information, huh? Parents overcome the urge to take charge when something goes wrong. When talking to your student, ask who can you talk to? Ask what's happened? What are the resources that we can connect with? How can this be resolved? Brainstorm with your students. Help them engage in problem solving with you. Help them reflect on how they've coped with stress on the past. What worked for them? Remind them of their strengths, okay? Remind them of some of the positive choices that they made in challenging times, and provide them with examples how they worked out in a good situation. Be mindful of time that this is the time that students may neglect some of their own personal health and wellness. It's not unusual for students to feel overwhelmed right now, run down, staying up late, writing papers, studying for exams, consuming large amounts of caffeine. Student health is a wonderful resource for students. They have a wellness person there as well who can help students to kind of take a look at some of the habits that they've taken on and how they can strategize for making some good decisions. Remind your student, I'm sure Wanda will agree with this, to be prepared for the registration process, okay? Encourage them to meet with their advisor well in advance. Come prepared for the meeting, because that's the way they'll get the most out of the meeting. Bring a list of questions, okay? Ready to discuss options and choices. Advisors are knowledgeable, they're professionals, but you know what? They're not mind readers. So you need to prepare. Remember that it's your son and daughter who needs to take responsibility for their managing their time, but you can provide some helpful hints, helping them to break down bigger issues into smaller goals or tasks so they're not feeling so overwhelmed and more in control. Certainly, it's always a good time to send students a care package, right, students? Right? But especially now when students' defenses are down, they're tired, notes of encouragement, homemade goods, and one student said, remind them to send money as well. Okay. Be realistic about holiday breaks. Your expectations might be quite different from your students. One mother told me last year that she was so looking forward to having some quality time with her son when he came home for Thanksgiving. Okay? Instead, she said she felt like she was running a B&B the whole time. Her son came home, dropped off the laundry, and the rest of the time he was either sleeping, visiting school friends, connecting with coaches, or talking on the phone. And, certainly this varies from student to student, but you want to be realistic about the amount of time you expect your student to spend with you. And for many first-year students, and gets into this friendship issue again, it's a time not only to compare life at different colleges, but also in an effort to alleviate fears. They need to feel that those long-term relationships are still very much intact. Remind your student that the best part of being a first-year student, a freshman, is that they can say, I'm still trying to figure things out. Remember that, students. I'm still trying to figure things out. When they're confused, when they have a problem, when they don't know what they're supposed to do, encourage them to ask for advice, a chaplain, a professor, a dean. There's always someone there for them. Don't look for a quick fix. There isn't one. I do want to say, as director of the parent program, we have an e-communication coming out to parents this week with some information about some of the dates and deadlines that Wanda talked about, and some information, other information. Also, we are starting a parent-family blog this month, so we'll be launching a blog, and I'll have a link to the blog. And if any of you also would like to share a story, you don't need to know how to blog, but I'd be happy to post some of your own experiences if you'd like. Students also will have student guest writers as well for our blog. Finally, believe it or not, may be stressful, but most students do find their way. Okay, folks, we have a few minutes for questions, and we have a friar here who is a sophomore, right? A sophomore, okay, who has a mic. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and she will come to you with the mic. We filled all of your needs. Okay. Yep, we have a question. Here we go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. everything's fine. Sure it is. Of course it is. Ah. Ah. Okay, yeah, yeah. So your tactic of not being pushy, see what happened? He called you, right? Felt okay? Yeah, great, good, good. And yes, I was going to ask, any veterans in the room, it's people who have already sent a student to college who maybe have a thought for this parent or something to share? No? They're all different. I think I shared during the summer that a few years ago we had I always ask at orientation how many have sent one student to college, two students, and a few years ago I was asking and mother kept raising her hand, 5, 6, 7. Finally I stopped, I said, how many have you sent? She said, this is my 10th, okay. And as I said, she looked great too. And, and but one of the things that she said was just what you were saying. Each student's experience was unique, and there were a lot of surprises along the way. For some students some of her children who she thought would have a very smooth adjustment, it was a little more rocky road. And so I think you're doing fine. You're doing fine. Other questions, comments? Yep.
So the question was, are all professors required to post grades? The answer is supposed to be yes. So welcome to my world in reference to some who have not. So, but in some cases they did, but they missed the deadline. So I tease them about that because, you know, the student turns something in late, you know, it's going to be something different there. But in some cases they have not, or they missed the deadline or whatever. So I tell students, if you don't have grades and you know that obviously you should, talk with your professor and find out exactly how he or she's doing. Yeah, definitely want to ask. In the back. Yes. Mm-hmm. Sakai? Yes. Sakai is a course management system that the student has between the student and the professor. Some of you are used to high school where you received a lot of that kind of information. That's not happening anymore. Okay, this is college, so it's going to be different. So no, you're not going to have access to Sakai. But not all professors even use Sakai. It's up to them if they want to include that kind of information with regards to courses, et cetera. Okay, but in reference to mid-semester grades, students are supposed to be able to see those, and they really need to ask why I have a grade that I have. Like I explained earlier about the chemistry or the biology, labs weren't included. With Civ, in some cases, maybe it's just the first test, and now they've had quizzes, et cetera, but those grades weren't included. So tell students, first of all, don't panic with the grade you received. Second of all, talk with your professor and find out why you received the grade that you had. Exactly, yes. It won't necessarily include every single grade. And they're in brackets for a reason. They disappear. That's just advisory. Just advisory. That's for people like me. And for your student, obviously, to figure out where they stand. That's it. Because students are thinking, I'm never going to pass this course. I'm thinking, it's a C. It's a mid-semester grade. You told me it's only based on one test. You've had 3. So let's do the math here. So get them to calm down and realize that and talk with their professors. And sometimes a professor will give them the most conservative grade to get them to come in because they've sent for the student or said, come talk with me if you have problems, and they haven't come to talk with them.
We will be here for a few moments after this. I know people have other commitments to get to, so we don't want to keep you. But we'll be here if you have questions that you want to or concerns. Please come on up and enjoy your. I'm sorry. Oh.
Okay. So the Office of Academic Services, this is the website that I was talking about. So students who are in the audience, if you don't know where this link is, you need to figure that out because it's going to give you all the necessary information with regards to academic skills. The link that says Tips for Academic Success is the one they need to click on, and that will show them exactly what is available to them.
Okay, so great, and enjoy your weekend, have a safe trip home. And also on parent website, please feel free to get onto our parent page also. I know a lot of you have clicked on and that ask a question. I usually get to folks within a couple of days, so please continue to do that. Have a great weekend, safe trip. Thank you.